We're very glad to have you tonight, and Oliver is the Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Cincinnati, and his work focuses on climate science and urban policy, including energy, transportation, waste, and food systems. And Oliver Kroner leads collaboration of government and community partners to advance and track sustainability, equity, and resilience strategies of the Green Cincinnati Plan. He's a published researcher and also a very experienced conference presenter. He's spoken at more than 100 conferences. They include the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, the ICLEI World Congress, Smart Regions Conference, Project Drawdown, International Congress on Sustainability Science and Engineering, and many others. He has a very long resume of accomplishments, and he's been very involved, of course, in our local community as part of the Green Partnership for Greater Cincinnati, the Mill Creek Alliance, and the Cincinnati 2030 District Working Group, as well as being the president of the Northside Community Council. So Oliver Kroner, welcome so much. And now I'd like to spend a minute introducing my fellow Rotarian, Ariel Miller. Ariel has been advocating for social justice and community development and solutions to poverty for over 30 years as a journalist and consultant with the Episcopal Diocese of Southern Ohio. And since 2019, she's been a reporter for Rotary's Sustainability, Environmental Sustainability Action Group called SRAG. She holds a degree in history from Yale, international relations from Fletcher School at Tufts, and a master's degree in health planning from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And is the recipient of the Cincinnati Human Relations Commission's 2011 Humanitarian Award while she served as the executive director of the Episcopal Community Services Foundation. And Oliver, I forgot to mention, you're a graduate of Miami University and also Northeastern University and a proud AmeriCorps alum. So with that, a big welcome to Oliver Kroner and Ariel Miller. And Ariel, I'm going to turn it to you to kick things off in terms of the presentation.
Thanks very much, Brett. And thank you, Ollie, for coming, and go AmeriCorps. All right, I'm going to share my screen and show you some slides to explain why we're doing this. Let's see. So what has this got to do with us? We are working on climate change because it's becoming a humanitarian catastrophe in the world right now. You can see this graph that the rate of people being displaced by climate crises, especially disasters, is just taking off. The right-hand side of the graph shows 2016, 2017, and 2018 when the curve is just taking off. Unfortunately, a lot of people are being displaced by natural disasters. In the United States, we're familiar with this from the wildfires that we've been seeing the last few years in California. In 2018, tremendous flooding caused by Hurricane Florence that displaced thousands of people in North Carolina through the rivers flooding. And in 2017, the terrible events of Hurricane Maria doing so much destruction in Puerto Rico. But what you can see from this graph is that most of the people displaced are in the southern hemisphere. And warming temperatures are starting to really threaten human survival. For example, here you can see the glaciers of the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau are disappearing, and that's water for 20% of the world's population. Similarly, sorry about that. In the Andes, a lot of ice loss since the 1970s is threatening the water and power supply of 80 million people. These slides were shown by an Australian biologist, Leslie Hughes, last summer in a webinar organized by Rotarians in Australia. Now, why does this matter to us in Ohio? The disasters that I've been telling you about are mostly not here. The reason why it matters is because, as you can see from the top of this map, The carbon dioxide emissions per capita that are highest are in the Northern Hemisphere, and look at the United States. But the vulnerability is mostly felt in Africa, Western Asia, and Latin America. And this is just not fair. I want to tell you about a high school physics teacher that I interviewed a few weeks ago from Uganda. Her name is Susan Katuyi Rose. And she is trying to help her students not starve. The rising temperatures over the last 40 years in Uganda have destroyed agriculture, and the soil is turning to dust. And in many districts around the city where she lives, farming isn't possible anymore. And if she is trying to reverse this by helping people plant fruit trees and try to keep those seedlings alive. And she's got teachers who are in despair and considering suicide. It's not fair to her that the heat that we're generating is threatening the survival of her students. Rotarians have a set of ethics, and we repeat this four-way test before every meeting. And this is true of Rotarians all around the world, from South Korea to California to Puerto Rico to India. Is it the truth? Well, I'm convinced that human contributions to climate change are part of the reason why it's accelerating. Is that fair to all concerned? The map I showed you shows that our consumption is not fair to Susan in Uganda. Will it build goodwill and better friendships? The conflict over dwindling arable land, water, and space is causing conflict all over the world. Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Well, continuing the way we are behaving now is not beneficial to all concerned. So this is why this situation is of concern to Rotarians. Well, you remember the phrase, think globally, act locally. I'd like to say care globally, change locally. And the reasons are that we all share the same atmosphere. There's no kind of walling off our atmosphere from that of Uganda. Our emissions endanger people around the world, so it's our moral duty to stop this harm. And scientists have been telling us that what we do over the next 10 years is absolutely critical. Affordable solutions are at hand. And this is why I'm so excited that Ali is here tonight, because he's going to tell us about actions that are happening already in our city that are making it more resilient and are contributing to new economic development and jobs. Cincinnati is one of the most advanced cities in the United States. So Mark Twain needs to just revise his text about our being 10 years behind everybody else. We're probably 20 years ahead. And we're hoping in these webinars to show you practical ways that you can be part of the quest to save humanity. This is a wonderful graphic from Project Drawdown, and I'll give you the website in a minute. Project Drawdown compiles a lot of research to help people think about what they can do locally to reduce carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases. And you can see on the left that the sectors that are pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere include electricity production, food, agriculture, and the way we use land, industry, transportation, buildings, and other energy-related emissions. And Oliver is going to be telling you a little bit about what the City of Cincinnati is doing to reduce all of those contributions to global warming. Why is that so important? You can see that the human-generated greenhouse gases are only partly absorbed by the land, that is trees and other plants, and oceans. 59% of what we're currently emitting stays in the atmosphere. So that means we should pay attention to where we can have a substantial impact in reducing emissions, because our poor planet is not able to keep up with what we're doing. And this is another drawdown graphic which shows you where the low-hanging fruit is. So the recommendation for concerned people around the world is to figure out what can you do where you are that makes the greatest contribution. We can see here why there's so much discussion on energy generation, how we get our electricity, whether we get it from renewable or clean sources or whether we get it from fossil fuels. And energy efficiency, for example, using LED lights instead of incandescent. There is a lot we can do in the way we farm and what we do with food and what we eat. And another issue that Rotarians are starting to talk about in the United States is trying to capture and sequester refrigerants so they don't warm the atmosphere. One of the other things that we can look at are social endeavors like educating girls, because if you educate girls, that is one of the biggest contributions you can make to reducing human contributions to climate change, because educated girls have fewer children. So there are social solutions as well. Oops, I'm sorry. Let me try this again. Can you see this? Let's see. I seem to have lost a slide. I wanted to tell you what Rotarians are doing and why we are paying attention to the situation. Rotarians are involved in every single aspect of humanitarian work that we're familiar with. They're concerned about health, they're concerned about community economic development, they're concerned about education, they're concerned about community economic development and peace, resolving conflict. And I think I've explained to you a little bit why all of these endeavors are threatened by climate change. If, as I said, we've got dwindling supplies of potable water, if we're experiencing drought and crop failure, we're going to have mass migration and conflict over resources. This is one of the reasons why the civil war in Syria became so savage. If we are seeing disease vectors expand to new areas where they haven't been before, like mosquitoes carrying Zika coming to the United States, to Texas and Florida, then we're going to see people coping with diseases that they haven't experienced before. If we are trying to develop micro enterprise in coastal cities and they are subject to terrible floods, then our investments will be for nothing. And this is why Rotarians decided collectively this last summer to make protecting the environment one of our top humanitarian priorities. As a result of this decision, we are now mobilizing people around the world to tackle this problem through drawdown strategies, as I've explained to you. And we are making available through our international networks of caring, nerdy, smart, practical people, both grants and technical assistance. And for example, our club is involved with a wonderful Rotarian in North Carolina called Nate Thomas, who is working with other volunteer engineers to put solar panels on schools in Uganda. And that is an example of energy justice, because for children in Uganda to be able to get free and reliable electricity means that they can stay safe in school and that they can study and learn and have access to the internet. Other kinds of things that we're working on that are new for Rotarians include circular economics strategies. For example, instead of throwing away garbage, we've got this wildly inventive Rotarian in India who is recycling things like chewing gum into building materials. We are working on smart transportation. We are going to be working on sustainable cities, which Oliver is going to tell you about in a minute. and we are working on all the drawdown strategies, including biodiversity, which includes sustainable farming practices, regenerative agriculture, and restoring habitats for pollinators. If we have no pollinators, we're not going to eat. So this toolkit here gives you some wonderful resources. So I'd like to encourage each of you to take a screenshot of this. If you don't know how to make a screenshot, we will be saving this broadcast, and I can also send you these websites. One is the website for Oliver's shop, the Office of Environment and Sustainability. One is Green Umbrella, which is this amazing regional organization catalyzing solutions here. One is for Drawdown, where you can read about solutions that you can apply. And then I've put down the Cincinnati Rotary Club, our Facebook page, Rotary International's new page on protecting the environment, our nerdy technical group called ESRAG, and this wonderful little website where you can figure out how many trees does it take to absorb the energy that you consume every year in your house or your business. And with that, I'm going to stop the share and turn it over to Oliver.
Great, thank you. Are we taking questions now, or should I just dive right in?
It's your turn.
Go ahead, Oliver.
Great, let me load up my presentation here. I appreciate the introduction. I think, do you have to enable my sharing? Here we go.
Yes. Got it.
Great. So I think some people are surprised to learn that city government has an office focused on climate and sustainability. But I think as I talk about this, it'll become clear why this is a top priority for us. I really appreciated the intro and the context, Ariel. You know, this is definitely a global problem, but it has more local impact than people realize. I think for many Americans, climate change has received this branding as a melting ice cap in the North Pole that will affect other species sometime in the future, somewhere far away. And this branding has been helpful at bringing general awareness to the topic, but has been unhelpful in that it makes it feel distant. And in the meantime, we are seeing these changes right here, right now. Definitely seeing an increase in heat year over year. Last 10 years have been record setting. Interestingly, we think of heat in the summer, but actually temperatures are increasing on average faster in the winter. So we're seeing milder winters in the Midwest that impact the freeze-thaw cycle, which impacts the ecosystem, particularly friendly to some of our pest species. We heard a little about mosquitoes and their booming population and why that's a nuisance, but also a threat, public health threat. I'm sitting here in College Hill right now. We've discovered West Nile virus in the mosquitoes here in the woods. So we used to call them tropical diseases, but as the climate for mosquitoes expands, so does the habitat for these viruses. Maybe more than anything though, the Midwest is seeing an increase in storm events. Climatologists measure storms as a 50-year, 100-year, 500-year storm events. So 100-year storm event is a storm that's statistically supposed to happen once every 100 years. In 2018, we saw 3 100-year storm events and 3 50-year storm events. So the stats aren't playing out as they should. And this is problematic for a number of reasons. One, we're a very hilly city, right? So hills lead to runoff and flash flooding. Hills, when we receive these storm events, become saturated, and we see land slippage, as we've seen on Columbia Parkway. And in Cincinnati, we have a problem where we have one of the oldest sewer systems in the country. And it was not designed with these storm events in mind. So when the system is overwhelmed, we experience flash flooding, we experience sewer backups. This is water coming up into people's homes. We're now seeing 1,000 to 2,000 sewer backups a year. And this comes at enormous cost. In 2018, we spent over $50 million as a city government to address these storm damages. And if you follow the city budget process at all, we need a new police station. But rather than build a new police station, we are fixing this landslide right now. So when you think about core governmental services, climate change is now disrupting core governmental services, core public safety services. I loved the Rotarian principles. Is it fair? This is a map of asthma rates by neighborhood across Cincinnati. Long story short here, you have an 88-fold increased likelihood of experiencing asthma as a child in some neighborhoods compared to others in Cincinnati. If we look at life expectancy, we now see a 25-year difference from one zip code to another and how long you're expected to live. Now, that's not exactly a climate issue, it's not exactly an environmental issue, but it's related. You know, poverty has many different implications. Poverty, crime, diet, access to education, access to healthcare. But when we look at the disruption caused by climate change, we see it as a risk multiplier. And in many ways, we're being tested right now under this pandemic. And we see that some households are better prepared to endure these challenges than others. And we know that some pockets of Cincinnati are on the front lines experiencing these risks. So when we plan for climate, we also ask, is it fair? And we are doing our best to plan equitably to prepare our more vulnerable communities. So this is a global problem. And maybe some of you have heard of the Paris Accord. It's become
I have.
fairly familiar. That's great. This Paris Accord was the first time the countries around the world came to an agreement that this is a problem and that we're going to do something about it. It was decades or more in the making, an enormous feat for mankind. And if you've heard of it, then you probably also know that the federal government withdrew from the Paris Accord in 2017. Is it fair? You most likely know that the US is one of the highest per capita emitters of carbon. And here we are abdicating responsibility for this global issue. However, the same day that the federal government announced withdrawal, our mayor held a press conference on the front steps of City Hall saying, the US may be withdrawing, but Cincinnati is not. This is a problem that is impacting our residents. We have a plan to address it here, and we will be doubling down. You know, if the federal government is not going to step up, we will. And that launched the creation of the Green Cincinnati Plan, which is the core of our work now. The withdrawal, the US withdrawal from the Paris Accord was enormously defeating for many of the people who worked closely on these issues at global scale, but it marked a shift. The Paris Accord did not explicitly tell countries how to meet their targets. And if you look at our federal politics, you can see how hard it is to come to agreement on virtually anything. When this responsibility shifted from the federal government to mayors and cities, we became much closer to on-the-ground solutions, right? So when you look globally at where carbon comes from, over 70% comes from urban areas, and that's a number that's expected to grow over the next 30 years. So you can say, well, clearly cities are the problem, or you can say, clearly cities are the solution. Cities are small enough to find political consensus, agile enough to act, but large enough to have real impact. So Green Cincinnati Plan is Cincinnati's vision, a community vision for a sustainable, equitable, resilient future. And this is a policy document that was shaped by enormous community input. So we heard from elected leadership, we heard from business leaders, faith leaders, community leaders, and residents. Ultimately, we collected over 1,400 recommendations to address climate issues in Cincinnati. And we partnered with the universities to analyze both the climate impact and the economic impact of the different recommendations. Really, the entire methodology was modeled after Project Drawdown, which we heard a little bit about earlier. And in order to address our carbon, we have to know where it comes from. So part of my role is to model Cincinnati's carbon emissions. And we've done this now twice officially, once in 2006 to set a baseline, and then a second time in 2015. I want to note here, residential buildings, industrial buildings, commercial buildings, together are approximately 60% of our carbon emissions. And that is energy generated to power and climate control those. And then transportation accounts for about a third. I should also note that in the protocol for measuring city carbon, we do not capture diet and consumption, right? So the food component that you see plays such a large role in drawdown is not captured in the global protocol for how cities measure carbon emissions, which is a flaw, I will say. But it gives you a sense of where we need to focus locally to make an impact, right? So we take this data and we took the analysis from the universities and the recommendations and came up with 80 strategies to reduce carbon 80% by 2050. I know this is an intimidating slide, but I'll simplify it for us. So this is all of the energy consumed in America in 2019. On the left is where all of our energy is generated, and then it flows across into where it is used. You can see that that maps pretty closely to where our carbon comes from. I don't know about you, but my face videos cover the far right of the slide, which is probably the most important part. So if you can move the videos out of the way, the gut punch of this slide is the gray shadow, the rejected energy. We lose 2/3 of our energy to waste. Waste in generation, waste in distribution. So when we talk about the importance of cleaning the grid and the importance of energy efficiency, I think this chart sums it up pretty well for us. So in Cincinnati, we've committed to 100% renewable energy by the year 2035. In full disclosure, we do not know entirely how we will get there, but we have mapped the first good chunk of it. And we're focused very specifically on our electricity generation. In Ohio, 10 years ago, over 90% of our electricity was generated by coal. Today, it is under 50%. we are trying to accelerate that and eliminate coal production by focusing our energy spend on renewables. So maybe you recognize this picture on the right. This is the solar farm at the zoo. This is currently the largest solar array in Cincinnati. This is 1.5, 1.6 megawatts. We are now under contract to start construction of a 100 megawatt solar farm just outside of Cincinnati. So approximately 20 times the size, 1,000 acres of solar that will power city facilities and begin to feed the homes and businesses of Cincinnati. It's important to note that we live in Ohio, which has a deregulated energy policy, which means that we all get our energy we receive our energy from Duke, but Duke is only delivering the energy. They are legally not allowed to produce the energy, which means that we get to shop for where our energy comes from. We can choose to purchase cleaner energy. We also have what is called community choice aggregation in Ohio, which means that the voters of Cincinnati voted to give the Cincinnati government the right to bundle all of the electricity demand of residents and purchase energy wholesale to deliver to them. It's the energy aggregation program. So we now shop for energy on behalf of between 80 and 90,000 homes and businesses, and we can purchase 100% green electricity and deliver it to them at a discounted price. Also important to note that in all of our contracting, we include workforce development components so that we are training people on the ground here to do this work, jobs that are hard to outsource. And we're building smarter. This is our District 3 Police Headquarters. This is the country's first net zero police headquarters. So that means it generates all of the electricity that it consumes. Solar on the roof, geothermal on the ground, high performance design. If you follow city budget, you know that we own buildings for a very long time, hundreds of years in many cases. So if we're going to build a new building, shouldn't we think about the cost to operate it? And for the first time in our history, we did that. We asked for, rather than just the first build estimate, we asked for an estimate to build and operate. And you can imagine how that changes the decision-making process when you're thinking over a longer period of time. We now have a building that for less than a 10% premium to build has no utility bill forever. We're a Rust Belt city, right? We used to be larger than we are now. We experienced pretty significant population decline. We have relatively high rates of dilapidated buildings and vacancy. We also have approximately 60% of our population renting. In a typical apartment building, you have a landlord who's responsible for maintenance and upgrades, and a tenant who is responsible for paying the utility bill. That means that there's no economic motivation for the landlord to build in energy efficiency. And over time, that's led to very poorly performing multifamily buildings. So one of the measures we track, the fairness measures we track, is called energy burden, which is the percentage of your income that you spend on your utility bill. And in a national study, our low-income residents pay the 8th highest energy burden in the country. So we've done some negotiating, arm wrestling with Duke to secure some funding to spend to address this problem. So our Warm Up Cincy program allows tenants to approach us if they are experiencing high energy burden, and we will go into the unit and provide retrofit and some behavioral coaching on how to reduce your energy bill. We're just getting started with this, and it's an enormous portfolio of work ahead of us, but it's the first time the city's really meaningfully taken aim at this problem. We're also, if you call the carbon profile of Cincinnati, about a third of our carbon comes from the commercial building sector. We are home of some big Fortune 500 companies, who are very progressive on climate issues. You may know that Fifth Third was the first Fortune 500 to go 100% solar. Kroger is laser focused on zero waste. Procter & Gamble's done a lot of interesting work around zero waste manufacturing. One of the efforts that attempts to drive down commercial energy consumption and carbon footprint is called the Cincinnati 2030 District. 2030 districts are popping up around the country. These are collections of big buildings, big property managers who commit to a 50% reduction in electricity, water consumption, and emissions from transportation by the year 2030. So Cincinnati is now the youngest or second youngest 2030 district in the country. However, we are now the sixth largest because the rate of uptake has been so rapid. We now have over 25 million square feet of property committed to this pledge to achieve these 2030 goals. It's almost happenstance that the 2030 goals align so neatly with the 2030 deadline that the National Climate Assessment has put before us. We have to cut our carbon in half by 2030. Shifting to transportation, again, this is a third of our emissions. We're putting a lot of energy into vehicle electrification. Electric engines are inherently more efficient than internal combustion engines. And if we can simultaneously advance our renewable energy goals, we can renewably power electric vehicles. When you survey citizens on why they don't drive an electric vehicle, the number one response is some form of range anxiety. There's fear that they won't be able to drive across town and charge if they need to, despite the fact that 90% of charging happens at home. So one of the efforts is to place more charging ports around Cincinnati and make them more visible. So we have a variety of grants in place and a variety of partners in place to install these chargers across the city. All of a sudden, I think, as more and more manufacturers commit to building only electric vehicles, the private market is stepping up in a big way. So where for a long time we were fighting upstream, all of a sudden there's pretty good wind in the sails. If you drive an electric vehicle, one of the incentives that the city offers is free parking at any city-owned meter. So you can come down to City Hall, get a little decal in your window, and park for free anywhere in the city, which is a pretty nice incentive if you work, live, or play downtown. And then we got to get people out of their cars. Number of efforts to get them to ride bikes, to walk, to ride a scooter. But we recognized that transportation, public transportation, is an area where our population is underserved. Interestingly, this is a slight side note. Maybe you'll remember the Amazon HQ2, where Amazon was asking cities to put forward proposals to locate their facilities, their second headquarters there. And cities around the country applied, including Cincinnati. We did not get it, for better or worse, depending on who you ask. But part of the feedback was, we don't have the public transit to serve our employees, which really helped the business community align and understand the need for improved public transit. So this May, I'm sure you are all aware of this, we passed a a sales tax that will increase funding to the transit system in the ballpark of $100 to $150 million to expand service countywide, to add more frequent service, and to begin to incorporate bus rapid transit for expedited service to really make bus transportation a viable option in Cincinnati. So I've tried to capture some of the highlights of the Green Cincinnati Plan. Again, this is 80 strategies to reduce carbon emissions 80% by 2050. Increasingly, we are focused on carbon sequestration as well, recognizing that 80% by 2050 does actually not get us all the way to where we need to be. But it's working. We're on the right path. So as we measure, we are able to demonstrate that Cincinnati has achieved an 18.4% reduction in our carbon emissions from 2006 to 2015. I'm on the cusp of being able to release 2017 and 2019 data, which demonstrates that we've gone even further. That'll have to be the next presentation. But we have to keep it up, right? This pace puts us on target to meet our 80 by 50 goal, but we still have a lot of work ahead of us, so we can't relax. Sort of a closing food for thought. In many ways, city policy, urban design is like DNA. In the same way, DNA scripts who we are, what we look like, what we're good at, how we behave. City policy and urban design shapes how we behave within a city. And we have designed cities that look like this. And then we ask people to get out of their cars, walk to work, ride the bike. We require parking for every new development, and then we get frustrated with the amount of stormwater runoff. We zone to build in floodplains and get frustrated when it floods. Over and over again, we have scripted the problems we're trying to fix in, right? So when we look at cities and how to solve these problems, we need to focus very much on policy and urban policy as a tool to work our way out of the problems we've created. A quote that I like: "The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it." So the whole plan is online at greencincinnatiplan.org. I'm easy to reach. Big part of my job is having conversations with people like you to try to figure out how we can work together to make this happen, to talk solutions into existence. So thrilled that you guys are focusing on this. Looks like it's going to be a great series, a lot of good speakers. And I hope that each of you finds some individual actions that you would like to pursue through the course.
So Oliver, thank you so much for a great presentation. Thank you for being our keynote presenter tonight to kick off this 5-seminar series. And Ariel, thank you so much for your presentation and all the work you've done to make this series happen. You've really been the spark plug behind it. So having said that, we can take questions from the group. If you put your questions into the chat room, Jody DeVoy will read them.
So we do have a first question here. The question is asking is there any toolkit or handbook that our city has created for individuals and households in our city wherein they can contribute to reducing their carbon footprint through their lifestyle changes? And if so, where could we access it?
Great question. The answer is no. We don't have that handbook. But we've been talking about it, and I think maybe, was it Jean here from Landfair? Landfair has reached out to us recently asking for something similar, and we have promised to begin to develop that. But I will say there are resources from other organizations. There's one that struck me recently, I think it was from Rocky Mountain Institute, that said, if every homeowner, if their next furnace was an electric heat pump, if their next car was an electric car, and they found a way to power their home renewably, either through solar panels on the roof or through an energy program like the one we offer in Cincinnati, America could meet our Paris Accord targets. So those are all fairly significant expenses, but I think for the most part, they're expenses that we will be making as individuals at some point. And if you can begin to plan to make those shifts when the time comes, you're making giant leaps forward in reducing your individual or your household carbon footprint.
Oliver, another question. The 1,000-acre solar farm, where is it located? And then how much energy does that produce or offset for the city? Or will it in the future?
It's located in Highland County. It will account, well, all of our renewable generation together now accounts for about 20% of the city's energy load. So that's a giant, but we still have 80% of the way to go.
And then how does that energy get to the city for use? Or is it just an offset?
So it's hard to answer this question without getting technical. But big picture, electricity is electrons, and you can't control where electrons go on the grid. So we are building solar to put electrons equivalent to 20% of our energy load on the grid. We can't say that that electron generated at that solar farm will go all the way through the wires to house at this address. But we can say that that amount, that volume of energy is coming onto the grid through a renewable source. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I would like to say something about that too from a justice point of view. I've been studying this, working with our Episcopal churches that are trying to decide if they should go for solar generation. If we're taking pressure off the grid and demanding less from the grid, especially in the summer when solar generates a lot of electricity, then we're ensuring that the electricity that other people are using is coming from cheaper sources. They're not having to tap into the nuclear or other more expensive generation sources. So we're helping to depress the prices for everyone by reducing our demand from the grid that is drawing from power plants.
We have another question that's come in from Ken Wright. He's wondering, do we have an agreement with Duke or Ohio Utility Board that can generate that large amount of energy, electrical energy? Do we have an agreement with Duke or Ohio Utility Board that you can generate that large amount of electrical energy?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of permitting involved in a project of this scale. It's been vetted by numerous boards, companies, lawyers. Lots of contracting, lots of agreements, lots of votes. But we have everything in hand. It's a deal that has been finalized.
But the Hoyt is never coming for us, just for big companies, no? The Hoyts never coming for the population. Everything by the government to control everything. So we never have nothing more cheaper because the Hoyt is coming benefits to the government to know the cities where live in each state. That's working this way, right?
I think what we're seeing in Cincinnati is that our government is trying to look out for all the citizens and is trying to be an advocate. And one of the things that's very moving to me as a religious person looking at the Green Cincinnati plan is that equity is front and central, and they really are trying to make sure that everything they do scoops up people who are most vulnerable, like those children suffering from higher rates of asthma. So there's a strong ethics in, even though we've had 3 members of city council leave their jobs for corruption, the civil service in the city has a lot of dedicated people who know what they're doing. And I think that's one of the revelatory things about seeing that the plan is so carefully put together. It involved community input, and it is measuring and keeping track of how well it's doing and reporting back to citizens. There's a moral and practical accountability there, which I find magnificent.
If I could comment on that, I think for a long time, everything was supposed to be universally accessible. So we designed policies that everyone could access. One of my favorite examples is the Fix-It Cincy app. So you can go on your smartphone, load the app, and if there's a pothole, report it, and it will come be serviced. If there's littering, report it, and public services will come tend to it. People loved it. Great program. Then we mapped where all of the services were being provided, and you can probably estimate how they begin to concentrate in certain neighborhoods on the map. And so, benign in intent, but doesn't necessarily deliver equitable programming across the city. So we're trying to be more intentional about looking at communities that are not receiving the same level of attention and focusing programs to serve those. The Warm Up Cincy program is a great example of that. We now have 5 block groups, census block groups in the city where we know they are suffering from the highest costs of energy compared to their income, and we are targeting programs to those locations. Or if you look at our tree planting efforts, rather than just a citywide canopy cover percentage, we are looking at a neighborhood by neighborhood level because we recognize that some communities have 70% coverage, others have less than 5. We're directing spending and attention to those locations.
Going back to the question about what people can do in their households, I'd like to mention Joanne Gerson, who's on the call, and she is the founder of Shamre Olam, which developed a program called Cut a Ton, that people in congregations could form study groups and work with each other to reduce their carbon footprint in their households. And the Archdiocese of Cincinnati has a program named after the Pope's encyclical called Laudate Si, which gives prizes to congregations who make changes both in household behavior and in their church buildings, and gives them awards. So you can also consult your faith community. I know that the Presbyterians at Mount Auburn Presbyterian Church are really smart about this. And of course, the Unitarians are usually about 7 years ahead of everybody. So you might want to consult your faith community to find out what resources are there. And those are some examples.
I
Hi,
don't know.
Joanne.
I don't know if it's still possible or not, but we had an energy audit actually done for our house. I think it was paid for one of the Hamilton County programs, and it was like $50 to have an energy audit done about 10 years ago. And they made recommendations that it's kind of like, okay, you need additional insulation, put in LEDs. So it gives you a very kind of that checklist thing, but it's specialized specifically to your house. And I think it was $50 to do it when we did it.
So I would like to add to augment all the comments that have been made. So first, Colleen, that's wonderful that you did that. We also did that. We went through Greater Cincinnati Energy Alliance, and it was quite a while ago. But
that's who it was.
so it was inexpensive, relatively speaking. I think you can still get them pretty cheap, but again, I haven't had the need to look. but we followed through and did, when it was time to replace our furnace, we replaced it with a geothermal. We also added solar. So in the summer, actually for about 8 months of the year, we don't pay more than $10 a month. Sometimes they owe us. That's always charming. But Shomrei Olam was dealing with, was open or created just for the Jewish community. And the idea that climate change has to be resolved through all communities, and religious communities are a wonderful place to put the effort, because they look at this as a moral and ethical issue, and you can bring all of the congregants of various faiths into the fold. And so now we have, through Green Umbrella, they have supported us forming Faith Communities Go Green. And I see, looking at the names, several people on this, on the screen that are participating in that. And if you're not, I hope you will. We also are looking for somebody to be a leader of the educational group. We have 4 groups, Life Changes Style, and I think they're looking into, I know they're looking into creating a toolkit for individual life changes. So Ollie, that may be a group that you want to work with or advise them or be a support in some way. Another group is facilities, so to look at how we can make houses of worship, or there are other religious institutions that are related, that are part of that religious community, be more energy efficient, from low-hanging fruit, from reducing waste or installing LEDs, up to putting solar, and which Ariel had mentioned that her Episcopal Church is looking into, and I know Ken is on this call and is looking into that as well. So there's lots of opportunities. The city has been working with the businesses through 2030, and so and Green Umbrella is part of that project, the 2030 project. And so we're looking at it as to how to reach all the individual people and talking about environmental justice issues. So I certainly hope you will get onto the Google, get onto greenumbrella.org and check us out and sign up, join us, or give me a call. I can put my email address in the chat. But
Great.
it's all very important stuff.
That's a great segue too, because the next seminar in this 5-seminar series is going to be Tuesday, December 15th at 7:30 p.m. And our presenter will be Thomas Schultz of Green Umbrella. And he'll be talking about the collaboration work being done across a number of different companies and businesses to cut down on energy use, water consumption, and transportation emissions. They have 300 different properties around Cincinnati that are part of that initiative and are collaborating to do that. So we look forward to the second in the series, again, December 15th with Thomas Schultz of Green Umbrella. But I just want to extend a big thank you, Oliver, for your presentation tonight. Oliver Kroner, thank you so much for joining us and leading this discussion. And Ariel, again, thank you so much for what you have done tonight to make this happen and kick this off. And this is recorded. The Rotary Club of Cincinnati has a YouTube channel. You can just search it on YouTube. This whole seminar tonight will be posted. So just go ahead, and if somebody couldn't join us tonight, just let them know to go to the Rotary Club of Cincinnati YouTube channel. It'll be there. So thanks again to everybody for joining tonight and making this such a productive and fun conversation.
Thanks for hosting.
Thank
Thanks
you
very
very
much.
much.
Thanks, Oliver. Amazing.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Do you have a moment to take Sam Schuette's question about batteries? He said, for solar projects the city is undertaking, did you investigate utility scale energy storage?
Investigate. So we did include language in our request for proposals around energy storage. We didn't get anything back that I guess was economically compelling enough to move on it yet. I think that's something we recognize will need to be part of the equation moving forward. But we're not yet pinched, right? So we're thinking more about battery backup for resilient centers, like a rec center that serves as a cooling station during a heat emergency or a place to stay warm when it's cold. But utility scale storage, we're not there yet. I think we are also thinking about electric vehicles as the future of energy storage. And they're essentially big batteries on wheels. And some of the technology, they call it V2G, which is vehicle to grid charging. Right now we plug our car in to power the car, but some homes are equipped to plug your house into your car to power your house. So if you think about that at scale, that could begin to deliver utility level storage. So that's still sort of theoretical, but at the microgrid scale, they are beginning to deploy that technology.
Fascinating.
Very good. Sam, good question. And thanks again to everyone for joining, and join us in 2 weeks and we'll keep this going.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Brett.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye, Kate.
Good night. Bye.
Nice
Bye.
to meet you. Good night, Victoria.
Bye.
Thanks.